can start.
We can start.
We can
Okay.
start.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for, excuse me, choking when we talk about this. I'm not used to flu. Wardrobe adjustment, sorry. Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming here this afternoon, and I want to share some thoughts on creativity and on sketching, drawing, as it were. So I'm going to follow one of my heroes, which is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he said about speaking, he said 3 things you want to always remember: be sincere, be brief, and be seated. So I'm going to focus on all of those, but probably on number 2, be brief, because I'd like to open it up and have questions as we go along. If you want to make remarks, you can do that. Well, we're not going to permit throwing of fruit or anything like that from the audience. So, but if you want to interject any questions as we go along, please feel free to do that. So, my background is, you probably know, or maybe if you don't, is I have been trained as a landscape architect, urban planner, and city planner over the years. And as a practical professional, I graduated from the academic programs in BC before computers. And so all the drawings we did were by hand. There was no other way of doing construction documentation, construction documents, even to the extent of conveying design concepts, quick sketches, studies, what this design would look like in section, perspective, in plan view. And so everything was by hand, and it was a craft. Everybody practiced drawing skills, and there was a lot of personal satisfaction and pride in producing this set of really nice documents. The line weight became important, even some shading in some of the details, so it would read well. Well, along came the computer, and guess what? That kind of changed the whole recipe mindset. And so we gravitated toward more of the technical documentation, and then they crept into the area of design. So design is now being done on computer as well as the construction documents. So what does that have to do with what we're talking about this afternoon? Well, there has been a renaissance from about 1980. All of a sudden, there was a realization that hand drawing was being left behind, as it were, because the computer was taking the forefront in documented design. And so what the profession saw was an absence of hand drawing and the ethereal quality of hand drawing, which is not present in the computer. So hand drawing, the realization was that it is still the most powerful tool of design thinking. So as an urban sketcher, also I go out to sketch. This is preparatory to folding into that whole approach, as it were. And so keeping current with that, with the hand sketching and drawing, I followed the advice of one of my compatriots in graduate school, a fellow named Laurie Olin, who's a well-known landscape architect. And he said, you should always read, because that's your connection to the rest of the world. So following that, I began to read, and just recently I came across 3 different books, which I would like to share with you some takeaways from those. And you can start with showing maybe an image on the screen. The first one is a book called Crit. I don't know if you've seen this book. How many of you seen this? Oh, you all? Have you read it? No. Well, Crit is by Angela she's a PhD in psychiatry. And she says that grit, she came up with a grit scale, believe it or not, she invented it. What is it that gives people the perseverance and drive to accomplish great things? And so grit, by her definition, is powered by perseverance and passion. It's passion for what it is you do, and then persevering in that. Well, why would that be important? Well, in teaching at ASU hand-drawing illustration, I had students who said, I just can't. Well, what she says, that is largely a myth, because if grit is the determination to accomplish a goal that is driven by passion and by purpose, then that has to be part of what fuels people to excel in whatever endeavor they're in, whether it's arts, sports, whatever, what have you. Furthermore, she says that the thing that drives that purpose and passion is practice. So we all look at Mark Spitz at the Olympics or whoever and say, oh, guy's a natural born athlete. Well, how many hours did he practice? He devoted his entire life to that. Why wouldn't he be excellent? Why wouldn't he be great? And so the other thing she says, but practice, look at that. There's something there about practice. You can practice and still not grow and develop, because if you keep practicing the same thing you've always done and the same thing you're good at, guess what? You get what you always got, right? So to make that quantum leap is to look at where are your weaknesses. Residual practice, she calls it. That's where you look at practice. For the longest time, I had trouble drawing people, figures, and sketching. So I got a book and I got it out and I started practicing. Guess what? After a while, I start to reach a threshold where now I can draw, and I'm still not satisfied. So guess what I have to do? I have to look at where those weaknesses are. How can I keep that going? And so that's important, because to grow in the whole realm of art, it's looking at practice. This is the passion. Obviously, people in here, you all have a passion, but then practicing it and evolving and growing to your best possible thing. And guess what? You don't stop. You keep growing. You got to keep growing. What's that saying? Deepak Chopra says you don't grow old. You grow old because you stop growing. Right? So that's the number one book, written by Angela Duckworth, The Power and Passion of Perseverance. Then there's a second book I ran across, and you probably may have heard this one too. It's called Visual Thinking by Temple Grandin. How many are familiar with this one? Well, Temple Grandin is, she's autistic. She's on the spectrum. And what she came up with was kind of an aha moment, is that we all think differently in different modes. There's visual thinking, there's verbal thinking. So if you're a verbal thinker, you're thinking words only. If you're a visual thinker, then you're picturing things in here, or you're observing, and you're looking for patterns and abstractions, forms, shapes, that kind of thing. And so if you're into the art world, as we may be, then there is a way to look at things both verbally and visually. Now, why do I say verbally? Well, one of the things I learned from a great mentor of mine is Jim Richards. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's an urban designer, landscape architect background, but he's also an artist. He's a fantastic sketcher. He does workshops all over the world. He's doing one in Santa Fe next week. But anyway, he said that in order to sketch, what was I talking about? What was the point? Kim Richard, thank you. Someone told me once, you can't speak more than 5 minutes without contradicting yourself. I think it was Mike Vance with Disney Studios. Anyway, the point is, if you can annotate your sketches, you can add an additional dimension to what it is you draw. Okay. And so he had one of his cardinal rules in his book, Hand Drawing and Discovery, which really is, we'll talk more about that discovery. But anyway, he said, annotate everything, annotate everything. And so recently I was up in Utah and sketching, and there was this marvelous stand of aspen trees and this little trail wandering down through the mountainside. I sketched it, and just all of a sudden something came to me. It was like, and this is more auditory thinking, maybe. It's one thing she didn't mention. But the song Stardust line, you wander down the trail and far away, leaving me a song that will not die. Wow, that's it. That's it. So I described that on the bottom of that drawing. And so that's another way that you can expand your perceptions and remember what it is that you draw. So thinking visually. She also, she is a PhD and she teaches at Colorado State University in animal behavior. And she did research, this is a little aside, she did research on how cows think. Animals think differently. Yeah, they're visual, right? You ever come across a dog that's unfriendly and he's looking at you? And if you pick down a rock, pick it up like this, and you're going to throw it at him, guess what? He might attack you because he's reading it as a threat, right? So they're very visually limited. And so you get a command like sit, you know, or come, you know. So part of it's verbal, part of it's visual as well. So think about that. Expand your thinking as you draw, as you create your art. Excuse me. So Temple Grandin, excuse me. She is a great thinker, and she also makes a case. By the way, I think that's something that we should carry home with us, is that unfortunately what's happening right now in many of the high schools is they're dropping classes that are hands-on, like shop, music, art. She says that's a mistake because there are people who are vital contributors to innovation into our society that think differently. And so we automatically cut them off by doing that. And so the other thing is, and I am totally convinced that if you sketch or you draw visually, that it expands your whole capability to analyze and look at something and understand it. Sketching, for example, is a very visual thinking process. You're looking at something and saying, how does that work? You know, well, the light's falling across this way, the shadow's that way. And the form of that tree is like a vase, you know, it's a dardanelle, or it's horizontal, creepy like a palo verde or a mesquite. So you're thinking about this as it were. And that contributes to the form of what it is you create in the statement that you make. And so thinking also it's the antithesis of this other thing that we use all the time, camera, which is if you want the exact thing that's there, you got it, right? But that's not what you want. You want what you interpret to you. Your DNA says what this sketch wants to be, what this drawing, this painting wants to be. And that's the exciting thing about art, is that everybody in here has a different perspective. Your drawing won't look like mine, mine won't look like yours. And That's great. It's the exciting part about it. That's why we have group critiques. Where? Okay, so that's the second book. And there's one more. There's just one more. And this one is titled The Adjacent Possible. How many have heard of this book? Adjacent Possible. This is fairly new. I think it's 2022. And there are two authors, Nancy Hillis, who's an MD, and Bruce Sawhill, her husband, is a PhD in psychiatry. Together, they teamed up and put this book together. She has another book also, but this particular one is great. If you can afford it, I'll tell you to blow your mind. It is absolutely incredible. It has examples of different artists' work throughout the book. I think it's 30, 40 book as well. And it shows how they assimilate her approach to creative thinking, which is adjacent possible. So one way to interpret that title, one way to interpret this is whenever you run into a roadblock, a block, stuff isn't working, there's always an adjacent possible. Always. Like, you do this drawing and it turns out that that's an ugly drawing. And then somebody else looks at it and they say, I've seen worse. And so it's not, by your own standard, it's not great. Never throw that drawing away, never. Because there's some redeeming value to that. Because it's a point of departure, it's a jump off point, it's a break point to why and how would I do something different. Okay. I'll tell you a story about when I was in my undergraduate program at Kansas State University in the landscape architecture department. We were in the design studio, and this is the end of the semester. It's the all-nighter before the final project is due. We've got the board laid out on the desk, and everybody's had half a dozen of us out there. We're pulling an all-nighter because we're putting our best effort into this last-minute moment effort. A charrette, if you want to call it that. What a charrette is, that's the Swiss name for a cart that's pulled through the streets in Switzerland as the architects rally for their final presentation. They throw all the drawings under this cart called the charrette. Anyway, that's the side. So the charrette's on. And we're in there and everybody's going great guns. Well, over here at this desk is my friend Dave Lovely. Now, Dave is this really laid back guy. Nothing excites him. He just nothing gets him excited. Calm as a cucumber. So Dave's up there and he's got his board out there. It's just a board. And this is BC for computers. And he's inking it all in. He's got it all inked and he's ready to add some color to it. And he's got a cup of coffee sitting right here. And he reaches over to grab his cup and it tips over, goes right across the board. And everybody goes, hey, what are you going to do? Dave just sits back in his chair, pulls out a cigarette, lights it up. He said, well, guess there's only one thing to do. Takes a cup of coffee, he pours it all over the board, takes a paper towel, and creates this marvelous patina wash across the board. And guess what? It was a home run. And so the point is, whenever you can't get there, there's always another way. There's always another way. And similarly, about that same time, I was taking a class in sculpture. I wanted to try it. And it was good old Kansas limestone, very easy, very workable. You get it with a hammer, it's soft stuff. So I had this grand vision. I'm going to be another Michelangelo, So I'm hammering away. Well, guess what? Every stone, once in a while, has a fault in it. And I hit with this 10th blow, and about a third of the rock waved away and fell on the floor. And I said, oh, what am I going to do? I can't glue it back together. No way. So now, devastated almost, I'm looking at what else can I do with this thing? And I started looking at it. Well, wait a minute. If I somehow it's kind of this shape, that shape. And so I kept working at it. Anyway, I came up with this form. It turned out to be, of all things, a very, very abstract hippopotamus. And I got an A+ for it. So, so that's the way things work sometimes. So the adjacent possible. Now, there's a methodology behind this too. And that is that Nancy Hillis and Bruce Sawhill, they say there is a program, or I should say a methodology, and it's built around an acronym of SEE. Okay. The I is the internal journey we all have. And that's our self-conversation where we have, put a line down, planks the wrong place. Or I have this great idea, or we spend more time, or whatever it is. Okay. So that internal voice is there, part of that journey that takes you through as you progress on your art or on a piece you're working on. Okay. So parallel to that is a book written by a couple of architects in San Luis Obispo at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Kobe Bagnall wrote a book called Universal Traveler, and they said, design is a problem-solving journey. Design is a problem-solving journey. And oftentimes, when you're working on something, it can be similar to that. And so the idea is, first step is acceptance. Take charge. I will address this. You'd be surprised how many people, students, of course not you, but students would say, they give up too easily. They don't even think about it. Well, like, yeah, I'm doing watercolor. Well, first step is acceptance. I take charge. I take authorship of this. I will. My intention is to complete this and do a final project or a piece. And so that intention is part of this journey, internal journey. Okay. And then the S, first S of the word C is start. And that's like the first brush mark, the first line on the paper. And so the key here is to be vulnerable. You got to be vulnerable. Brene Brown said it really well. She said, she's a great author. She said, vulnerability creates the greatest innovation. It's the risk. Never tried this before, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to try it. So give yourself permission to fail. Give yourself, this doesn't work out, big deal. Ben Sanders said it another way. He said in his book, anyway, he said, remember rule number 7. He was the conductor for the Massachusetts Symphony Orchestra. And so he dealt with a lot of musicians, and they're very temperamental. They miss a note and they're just devastated. I missed a note. You say, hey, get over it. You made a mistake, just stand back and say, hey, I made a mistake. How fascinating. Mistake. So the idea is you want to move ahead and connect the dots, as it were. So Xander's philosophy, rule number 7 was, he said, and if people say, what's rule number 7? He said, it's never take yourself too seriously. And then he said, by the way, there are no other rules. So that's part of that internal dialogue is making that first step. And then the next step is the first E is experiment. Experiment. Why would that be important? Because you can't grow unless you take that step and again be vulnerable Okay. And then try something new. And her husband, Bruce Sawhill, is a surfer. They live in Santa Cruz, California. And so he uses the analogy of riding on a surfboard, surfing. And he said, you're out there, you're looking for the perfect wave. And there is a phrase in, I'll look it up here, I forgot what it was exactly, but it's called, is everybody following this so far? Is this making sense?
No, it's fascinating.
He calls it poised instability. Poised instability. What that means is, have you ever tried this exercise of bouncing a broom? You put the handle of the broom in the palm of your hand and you try to keep it upright, and when you go like this, and finally you find a spot, and for a few seconds you got it. It's balanced perfectly. Poised instability. And that's a great point between stability and not stable. And so what you want to do in experimenting is to go into that mode and try something until you find something that really resonates, something that works. Okay. And if you don't do it, if you're just concentrating on stability, guess what? What are you doing? Playing it safe. And you play it safe, you're going to get what you got all the time. Rita Mae Brown said, she said, insanity, her definition is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Doesn't happen. So like poised instability, you got to get out there. You got to try something, experiment, and you will be surprised what works. It's just like the early example of the coffee going over the board or the sculpture breaking. So you're going to enter that zone, and then you want to go for it. Okay. So poised instability. Okay. And that happens when you have those conflicts arising, or if your challenges arising. The last E then of IC is evolve. Now you evolve into a whole new area and you expand that, and whatever that gives you as a result. And then guess what? I'm going to try it again. You don't stop, right? You grow, evolve. So IC. That's the great part of that particular book. And I don't know if I talked about ugly drawing yet. I did mention it. I did that. You never want to throw an ugly drawing away. Personal story is I did an ink and a watercolor wash, and I didn't do it plein air. I did it off of a photograph and just kind of practicing fooling around, and it came out just pathetic. So I folded it up and I threw it in a wastebasket. After a while, I started feeling kind of guilty on it. Look at that. So I went back and looked at it. Poised instability. I didn't realize at the time what I was doing, but then I took a white marker and I started working with it. And long story short, it's framed and it's sold. So you can do something and you think it's really pretty bad, set it aside and then go look at it a couple of days later. And you look at it and say, that's not too bad. Yeah, then if I did something here, something there, I could make this really, come alive. So, okay, any questions on any of this stuff? I've been kind of rattling on here. Those 3 books, and those are all, by the way, on Amazon, and I don't get any commission. So I would encourage you to pick one. particularly this last one here, it is really, because what happens in there, the different artists in there, there are probably, I don't know how many to count them, but I think there are 20 or 25 artists in the book. And they all comment on various aspects of this methodology, where they made their breakthrough, their aha moment, as it were. So that's there. Now, I thought maybe what we could do in the remaining time here is maybe do a little demonstration, and I could show you some line work from an urban sketching point of view. So this may not be applicable to everybody here, but I think maybe there are some takeaways that might make sense. Might make sense. So I need some paper. Now, if I draw this, is it going to be right side up for them, or it's going to be upside down?
Right side, right side up.
It's going to be right side up?
Yeah.
Okay. That would probably, yeah, okay. Perfect. Now I use a pen. A lot of people use pencil, charcoal, whatever. Yeah, that's great. Perfect. Perfect. Perfecto. Okay. So different people have different ways of approaching a sketch. And like I was saying earlier, that first mark on the paper is like, you break the ice. And so what I like to do is start with, okay, I'm gonna just draw something here that represents frame, as it were. Okay. What I like to do is draw people first. You don't have to do it that way, but there's a reason why I do, and that is in urban sketching, I look for scale and proportion. And so if I draw a human figure, I know the human figure is about 5 feet more or less. Sometimes a little bit smaller, but 5 feet is a nominal size. So, and the other thing is, in making sketches believable for an urban sketcher, that if you do an abstract things or what, other subject matter this may not apply, but if you're doing urban sketching, which I do, I put a horizon line in, or eye level line, L. And don't let that frighten you, because eye level line is just simply level that your eyes are at, right? And so if you're viewing something, standing or sitting, there's an eye level line. Right? Someone say right? Okay. Okay, so if we draw people, here's a rule of thumb. There's a head. Oops. There's a head. Okay, so that's one head. If I draw 3 of those, that's 3. And if I draw 4, that's 4. This is called the rule of 8. So there's 3, 4, total of 8, right? So this is the torso. That's the feet. And there you go. So that's one way that you can very quickly calculate. Now you can do takeoffs on that. You can do a side view where
You only get 6.
you only get 6 or 7, 8. What?
1, 3, 4. 1, 3, 4.
1, 3, 4. That's 8, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm saying.
Okay. Basic math. Now, if you do this, you got one foot going forward, the other foot's back. This is a side view, okay? As it were. And usually what happens, this is just nomenclature. If I put this foot forward, I've usually got this other opposite arm that way. So this is the gait, right? It's opposite arm to leg. Capiche? So if I draw a person here, I'll show this arm swinging this way, this arm swinging back, right? This is mechanics. That's kind of boring, I know. So anyway, let's look at this because in sketching, line work, particularly if you're working with a pen or pencil, becomes important. And so eye level line, I'm just going to show you what can happen here. I'm going to draw a path. This path is coming around like that on this horizon. We know that things recede into the background, right? Foreground, midground, background. And then there's a person right here. There's a head, and I'm drawing those proportions, basically, something like that. Now, to create depth, I'm going to put a larger person, but guess where their eye level line is going to be the same? It's going to be the same. It's going to be on that line. And so that person is going to be walking here. Okay. Someone walking with them. And then there's someone walking even closer. Their head's going to be on that same line. Right? I'm going to make them go the other way. They're walking away from us. Okay. So you can see how that creates depth. In other words, it's going into the distance, receding. Okay, so then I'm going to frame this. I'm going to draw a tree over here. I'm going to draw another tree over here, like that. And maybe this thing is branching. So these lines, like that.
Wayne, what pen are you using?
This is a Pelican fine point fountain pen. And you can use micron pens. You can get the very thin ones too. I just happen to use these because point never wears out and it's piston filled. So I can get a bottle of ink and not a cartridge. Cartridges I burn through and they always go dry when you least expect it to happen. So I use a Pelican pen. And there's another good pen too. It's called, I don't have it with me. I don't think, yeah, I do. Hold on. There's one made by Lamy. It's called the Lamy Safari. Looks like this. And if you want to be really want to be stylish, it's L-M-Y. You don't see Lamy, you say Lamai. This is my Lamai. Okay. So what this has a converter, and you twist this and the plunger goes down, just the other way, it sucks the ink back up in here. So it's not a cartridge, this is a converter. These sell for about $30 and the converter's like $5 or $6. Okay. Fine and extra fine. Excuse me. And fine because basically my perspective is sketching is a language of lines. You're not drawing objects or things, you're drawing lines that represent what you see, represent things. And so you don't want to get all tangled up with a lot of detail because, and this is where I have students want to get into minutia of detail with lines, and that's a trap you can fall into. What you want to do is suggest, that's the whole idea, and capture the essence of what it is you want to show. So here we go. We got these trees, and I'm drawing foreground first. Why? Because if you layered things, foreground is here, okay? If this lamp is in the background, I draw the foreground. If you're looking at this, this is going to block out that, so you don't have draw overline, not overlining. Does that make sense? So you start with foreground. Well, let's say in here, there's a rock formation like that. Okay. And then in the background back here, there's a row of vegetation, kind of on the horizon line. And then back of that, there's some building mixes. Okay. Now I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. I'll tell you why. Because if I wanted to show some intermediate trees in here, then you wouldn't see part of that background, right? So I want to draw the middle ground next, and I'm going to do that. And supposing there's some in here. Now the background are these buildings, and maybe there's a focal point back here like a tower, and maybe there's another building mass over here. Okay. Now I'm going to look at working from the foreground. So tree there. This is grass in here. Now this is a language, vocabulary. In other words, the language of lines requires a vocabulary. And so this little line work is saying that's turf. And as it goes to the back, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller because less detail in the background, right? You don't see it as much. So this is like background here. This is going to be more prevalent in here. So now I start looking at this in terms of detail. Now the foreground trees here, I'm adding some more strokes in here, but there's some leaves. Now I can see the leaves because these are close up in the foreground, right? So I'm adding some texture to that. Another light, another stroke. This is a different stroke, a different symbol, as it were. This is part of the vocabulary. So I'm going to add some in here, and here, and here, and here. It's very sloppily, but you can do it more precisely. And then I'm going to show maybe there's some shading in here. There's some texture to the trunk. I'm going to flesh that out on these trees that are close up. Okay. And now the background, this row of vegetation back here, you don't see any detail at all. This becomes a value. So just a series of diagonal marks, a pattern. And you notice this is done with great rapidity. Why? Because in sketching, you can do a line like this. Or if you're an engineer, no engineers in here, are there? You know how they draw? They go like, why not just do that, right? Be quick, be decisive. And so that's where you're being vulnerable, but that's okay. So now I'm popping out this background back here. Okay. The trees here are just suggestions because there's no detail in the foliage, right? And the background here is very loose. Now I can also start to tie this together with ground plane. There's a shadow falling across this walkway, right? From these trees in here, in the ground plane, and there's one here, falls across the walkway here. And that's a really quick shadow. Quick shadow. Now there's some windows in the buildings here, but the detail is going to be just like this. It's going to be, they're just dots, right? That's it. Now I can add some more detail in here. Maybe I power this up with some here. And I get some shadow across for these people, these folks. This is called stitching together with darks. And so that starts to pull this together as a sketch. And so then we end up with something like that. Now, if I want to add some more detail in here, I could even do some more leaves. So what this is, the language of lines, and one of the things that can help in sketching, as you see here. Oops, I forgot one thing. You know, in walkways, there are expansion joints. You know what that is? To keep the concrete from cracking. And they're basically 10, 12 feet on the center of the walkway, like this. And so back here, you know, perspective, how the telephone poles get closer together at the distance. Same thing here. So back here, these are real close together. Up here, they get wider and wider. And that is another way to create the depth in there. So foreground has the most detail, midground has some, background is very little. Yeah. The other thing is this eye level perspective thing here, where the head is always on that eye level line for drawing people. Now, the other thing that can happen is well, let me make one more point here. Why these lines are so important is you can develop a vocabulary of lines. And one way to practice that is to do a series of squares very quickly and practice doodling. So here's a doodle. Notice how quickly I'm doing that. I mean, it doesn't have to be, you're not doing, you know, I'm not doing that. You're doing it quickly. I would have students practice, I would time them on how many of these squares they could fill up in a minute, right? So another texture might be this. Okay, another one might be this. Another one might be this. This might a series of these little arcs. So this might be water. This might be grass. This might be pavement. This could be a tile roof. Vocabulary. It's like learning a language. What's the key to learning a language? Anybody? Ferris Bueller? Anybody? Anybody? Vocabulary, right? You got to learn vocabulary. If you don't, and it's same way in sketching. This, you know, somebody once asked me, they saw me do something with this, and I show them the finished product, and say, how long did you do that? I look at her and say, 8 years. Yeah, what? He said, yeah. So I say, get yourself a little sketch journal, and anywhere you go, you're sitting in your dentist office, right? Listen to a boring lecture. Maybe not like this one, but you would doodle. Take out your pen and, you know, doodle. See how many of these things you can do. And if you try drawing, you know, parallel lines, and then go the other way. By the way, this is how you can create darks, is overlining, right? Or do a series of curved arcs like this. A lot of times that could be a tree symbol. Or maybe it's a loose form like this. Or if it's a series, if it's a Palo Verde, maybe it's going to be like this. Those are all just parallel lines, right? So you can see how quick it is, and your vocabulary is a key to sketching. It really is. Questions so far on anything? Now, there's another reason why I said earlier to draw people first. And that is, if this is 5 feet, I'm over here and there's a tree next to this person. And I'm looking at, that's 5 feet. And a lot of times I'll wait until a pedestrian moves into view so I can use them, okay? And then I'll say, okay, that's 5 feet. Well, let's see, that's 3 people high. So that's 1, 2, 3. So the top of that tree is like that. That gives me scale. Or the other thing I know is I want to draw the doorway next to this. I know that a doorway like that one behind you is at least 8 feet tall. That's a norm. These are some ideas, dimensions you carry in your head. So I know that doorway's got to be like that. Okay. And then I know if the building is a 2-story building, I know the floor plate is like 10, 12 feet. So, but it's like 4 people high. So maybe there's a top 2-story building right here. Right. So somewhere there is a floor plate, and then there are windows in here. So that's another way of comparative measurement. Or if I know, I want to know how far is it over here to this bench. There's a bench over here. Somebody sitting there. How far is that? Well, let's see. That's 1, 2. That's 2.5 people over. So I know how far, where to place it. So it's comparative measurement. That's another reason to draw people. And then to my students, I say, well, hey, who are you designing for? People. So why not? Draw people first. Now, if you're doing a landscape, then okay. You don't have to put people in it. I'm not saying you've got to do that. You have to do that. No goddess. There are no goddess. There is a book entitled The Reluctant Messiah by Stephen Bach, and great read, and he goes through a whole philosophical discussion on life, and it's a great quote at the end. He says, P.S. everything in this book may be wrong. So I've talked for almost 2 hours, and I probably contradicted, or 1 hour, excuse me, I'm exaggerating, it feels like 2 hours. I probably exhausted your patience, but I would take any questions you might have, or if you want comments, or anything you'd like to say, add remarks for good of the order, what have you. Anyway. But I find, yes.
Do you use your sketches for paintings, or what do you do with your sketches?
Yes, I do. I use watercolor. Right. And that brings in a whole different, character to what you do. A lot of times I'll do a sketch in like this, and then you can really make this thing come alive with color. Color is a whole different, approach. And the one thing I learned about color is, and here again, this is another piece of information you can deal with that applies, and that is cool colors usually recede and bright colors advance usually when you look at it, unless you want to emphasize something in the background. If you really want to pop some out, you'll use those. Jim Richards calls those confetti colors, like white, orange, red, yellow, primary colors, fuchsia, maybe turquoise, whatever. But that's why they call it Purple Mountain's Majesty. It's a Purkinje phenomenon. There are particles in the air, and the mountains are purple. We know they're not purple, but they look purple, right? So do any color on something else.
Duane,
Yes,
do you ever turn any of your sketches into a painting? And is this as successful as your sketch? You know, when you make something this and you make the,
yeah, well, that's one right there, I guess, that's a painting, that one you just had up there? One of the school here? Where'd it go?
That was a live shot. She took her camera. She just took her phone out.
Yeah.
Oh, oh, okay. Yeah, there's, well, did you take one of the, yeah. Is it there?
Well, I just showed in color your painting.
Can you show it again? I
Yes.
don't think they saw it. Did you see it?
see it? I'll do it again.
Okay, and then there's one right around the corner too of Jackknife. Jackknife is the sculpture that Ed melted out of the roundabout. Okay. Whoa, I'm getting busy.
Okay, here we go.
There, okay, there. That started out as a pen and ink sketch. Okay, and then color added to it. And then this one likewise, yeah. So, yeah, it turns, yeah, like, you know, without the sky, without the other colors, it just doesn't, it's not the same.
That wasn't my question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
My question was, do you ever take your sketch and make a full sheet of painting out of it?
Oh, like a thumbnail sketch and then
No,
blow it
I
up?
mean, you get your sketch and you like it, well, I think I'll do a big painting of it. Does it come out the same?
Oh, I see what you're
Because
saying.
I think, I mean, my experience is something, when I do something small, it could be a gem. Well, if I try to make it big, it's a bust.
Yeah, yeah, it depends on, yeah, it depends on the composition, I think. In other words, I'm trying to think of if I've ever done anything quite like that. I've done a lot of thumbnail sketches that look great, you know, but then drawing them larger, you have to look at the shapes and forms differently. The level of detail is different.
And it just doesn't look as fresh to me. I'm talking about
Yeah,
myself.
right. It will look different, sure. And sometimes you redraw something and it won't come out looking good as you'd like. Yeah.
So does that mean that you like to draw on watercolor paper? So that you.
I do a lot of drawing on watercolor paper, and the ink is waterproof ink. I did use some that wasn't once. Interesting effect. Very interesting.
What paper do you use in the watercolor? Do you use Arches or hot press or what?
140 pound, the 40 pound cold press. But I've used Arches.
140 cold press.
Yeah. Yeah. And then colors, I use Daniel Smith. Smith colors, yeah. But there are other good ones too. Depends on what you like. Now I'm going to try something this next week I've never done. I was talking to Jane about this earlier, which is the gouache, wet gouache. I've never done that before. So stay tuned. I don't know I have no idea how that's going to go. But I'm trying this. What's the phrase I used? The poised instability. That's what I'm going at. Yeah, I'm going at it with poised instability.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. Yeah.
You'll be fine.
So anyway, but I encourage everyone, the biggest thing, I think sometimes we become our own worst critics. You know what I mean? I met a lot of artists and a lot of them are very self-critical, and but some aren't. Some are, but anyway, don't be. You have nothing to apologize for, really. It's wonderful that you're doing that. And for the life of me, I can't understand why anyone would not want to attempt or try at least to do something. But there are other art forms too, you know, there's sculpture, ceramics, weaving, quilting, what have you, all kinds of things out there. So,
Thank
and-
you.
yep, okay, thank you all.
Great, Duane, very inspiring.
Wonderful.
Well, you know, there's an old adage, and I really believe it, it's true. When one teaches, two learn. So, thank you all for being here.
Hi, Judy.
That was excellent.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. God, I gotta go buy books now. I'll go and
Just don't use it for doorstop.
I, one in, one out. He just, because I have
That's
so
what I
many.
need.
Yeah.
That's what I need.
I go to places and I trade them, and now if they don't, they'll actually, would they like a reader?
Yeah.
They'll donate them for you.
Oh, yeah.
And with the credit.